Okay. Hey, Kai.
Hi, thank you for the invitation.
My pleasure. I really appreciate you making the time. And I think just as an entry point, we were just discussing your latest blog post about the bittersweet ending of the AI Act, which I found very illuminating and very honest in bringing the pros and also the cons in the same level of directness and honesty and professionalism. So that is something that I will link to the recording that we're doing so that people can have a more in-depth look. And with that, let's just have a short intro on why we're making this recording in general. So I'm promoting AI safety through standardization and policy through my different positions in the Israeli ecosystem, be it in the academia, government, industry. And we met about 6 months ago in Geneva and had a vibrant conversation with a lot of other interesting people like Gary Marcus and other people doing policy, working literally on the UAI Act. And we talked about doing this recording for a long time, and I'm so happy it's finally happening. Obviously, there's been some delays. So with that, I want to give you the stage to just tell us a little bit about yourself, what you're doing, what you have been doing lately, and how you got to do that.
Yeah, sure. So basically, my journey here in Brussels started now actually 10 years ago already. I was working back then at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and already in 2014-15, my main focus or one of my main focuses was digitalization. And over the years, this narrowed down basically to AI and data. And AI, what many people also don't really know, is now a topic in Brussels really since I think even 2012, when the European Parliament made a first resolution on robotics. It's kind of famous in academics because this report was proposing to give machines a legal personality. It's not anymore something the majority would do, but back then it was a proposal. And based on that, there was then the high level expert group. The European Parliament wrote also several own initiative reports. One of them, my boss, Axel Voss, and I wrote together. And my boss and I, we were also the rapporteur of the special committee called AIDA on AI and digital agenda, where we also put together a long report of how you should regulate what needs to be added when it comes to finance, investments, education, and so on and so on. And then the AI Act came. So it's again not coming out of the box. It was not an invention of the Commission, but it was really based on all this prep work, not only in the European Union, but also globally, the OECD, the UN, and so on. Yes, and as I underlined, I was one very small piece in this ecosystem. And in the AI Act, there I was, let's say, maybe a bit bigger piece together with my boss because we were one of the people from the parliament who were negotiating it. And Axel and I spent a lot of time and energy in pushing for certain ideas. And yeah, you mentioned already my article. At the moment, we have mixed feelings. We achieved a lot, but also certain things we are not very happy with.
We'll touch a little bit on that later on. And that's a bit of the story behind how you came to Brussels also.
Exactly. Exactly. So
Okay.
it's yeah, it was really a long process in from digitalization to more and more AI policy. And yeah, AI policy is really now, let's say, this focus topic of my professional life for the last at least 7 years. And it became also always more, let's say, public, this topic in the last years here in Brussels. At the beginning, it was really a complete niche topic, and people looked at me and said, "You are doing AI, huh?" But now everyone is talking about it. So it's also from this regard quite interesting to see the changes.
I have a funny anecdote on that from my perspective with standardization for AI from 2018. That was. I'll mention that maybe later on when we delve into that. But before
Yeah.
we do, since you've been doing that for the last 7 years, let's talk about the essence of the work that you've been promoting. When we started talking about this conversation, we were before the finalization of the AI Act, and it got postponed so much that now we're already in a finalized stage. So we can just talk about the AI Act today I think it's an extension conversation of the blog post that we just mentioned, and then a little bit about points forward. How do we see that progress?
Yeah. Yeah. So when it's coming to the assessment, as you said, we are almost finished with our legislative process. So the committees here in the parliament, as well as the so-called COREPER and the councils, so the member states have already adopted the AI Act, but now what is missing is that the whole parliament and the whole council are giving basically the thumbs up, the green light. And after there will be just some weeks of translations, and then probably a rather early publication in the official EU journal. And with this step, 21 days after, the EU AI Act would become a law, so would enter into force. We will not see any changes anymore. So what is now being adopted by committees and COREPER is the final text. Maybe here and there the lawyer linguist will change a commata or something else, but on top there will be no changes. And yeah, as I said already, and also in the blog post, for me, for someone who is now that lengthy following already the AI Act, it's lights and shadows. It's first of all, I'm extremely happy about what we achieved. I would say the AI Act is really a future-orientated digital law compared to a lot of other pieces. Probably we will be able to better adjust and especially swiftly adjust the AI Act. There is this possibility of the Commission to do delegated acts and change articles. There are expert groups that are not the normal European Union expert groups that just need to be heard, but then are often ignored. Our expert groups, they really have a say. They can, for example, notify the Commission that there is a foundation model that is posing a systemic risk, and then the Commission needs to go through a designation process. Of course, they can reject it in the end, but at least they need to start the process. And with all those points I just mentioned now too, I think we managed to create a law again that is able to deal in principle at least with something that is so highly dynamic like artificial intelligence as a technology group. What I also like very much is our focus on value chain and information sharing along the value chain. People who monitored my activities over the last 2 years at least know that on that I can probably say I was the driving force in the European Union on foundation model regulation and even more AI value chain information sharing, because I really believe that both points are extremely important for SMEs and startups, not only from the European Union, but also your startups, for example, in Israel, because even though we all cooperate with US big tech companies, and I really value their activities, and they are extremely good, I think, for our industry, for our life. But of course, there is a fact of market concentration, and with what we added, we didn't want to prevent US or Chinese tech companies to continue their good work, but we wanted to make it a little bit more easy for smaller market players to also create a good business and so on. And this, I could now continue. There are a lot of good points, also standards, your topic. This heavy focus on standards in the AI Act, I think, will also make it much more future-proof. But to conclude maybe a little bit with the negative points, for me, and this I was not even writing in my blog post, for me the biggest negative point is really this lost potential, lost chance, because the AI Act, with those points that I mentioned, is already good, but it had really potential to be an extremely good law. And the European Union, because of a mix of different elements like strong characters, like this time pressure, and so on, we really messed it up in a way that there are easy mistakes and easy flaws in the AI Act, and I mean easy in a meaning easy to fix. So it was completely unnecessary that those are there. For example, that the definitions are all extremely vague. Well, we should have just sitting together for 1-2 days and improve it together with the legal service, but there was no willingness to do it. That we didn't check really in overlaps with other legislation, even though the companies were for months and years telling us that this is a huge problem. Also that certain people just didn't want to do. And I could also now continue with this list. This is why, yeah, I feel indeed it's really a lost chance, and it's just so unnecessary that we have those flaws now in the final text. And as someone who is always perfectionist, I need to say I have really my problems to to deal with this outcome. And hopefully in 6 months or in 12 months, I'm mostly concentrating on the positive elements. But right now I'm still in the process of
Well, I think
dealing with
I
the
think it's a good
difficult side.
thing. I think it's a good thing that you're articulating what needs improvement. That
Yeah.
being said, I will say that for perfectionists like yourself, they say that the enemy of good is perfect,
Yes.
right? Because
Yes.
then
Yes.
you keep on going and you're never
Yes.
finished. And
No.
at some
True.
point, you need to, it's like an MVP. You need to push something out into production and have users start
True.
using it and give you a
True.
feedback loop. So looking at it from a product perspective, I say I'm really happy for two things. I'm happy it's already finalized and that it's being pushed out. And I'm happy that we have people like you to highlight in a positive, in a well-intentioned manner, what needs to be improved, right? Because you're not coming in saying the EU is bad, let's discard of it. You're saying it's good, but we need to improve A, B, and C, which I find is fantastic. And it makes the conversation much more professional. I will say also to, conversing with your blog post back and forth, that the bitter sweating is not the final say in my mind, because one of your first annotations there relating to Sebastian, who's the chair of JTC1, which we'll touch up and explain later what it exactly is, really gives me the hope that standards might help bring some of those gaps already, even before touching on the legislative abstraction layer. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about my motivation for dealing with the topic and leading to this conversation. And the key point I'd say is the innovative approach that the EU took on how they view standards as a vehicle to implement the legislation. So we talk about promoting startups and SMEs and micro SMEs, which between, but they take a big chunk of the business arena in Europe. And when you think about that and you remember other legislations like GDPR, you're thinking about conformity and you're thinking about big law offices taking the conformity on their shoulders and small companies and small players having to basically spend a lot of money to have that assurance that what they're doing is okay and that they won't find themselves in very hefty lawsuits. And the whole idea behind the involvement of standards within the EU Act, the way it's institutionalized, is that the legislator itself will come in with the standards needed to make it much more approachable and easy for companies, especially small ones, especially those startups, to implement the guidelines. So I think there's even Dragos himself, who was also a very prominent voice in promoting the EU AI Act from a legislative perspective, and he's also a judge, if I remember correctly, in training. So what he said literally is that the EU AI Act is not going to be like GDPR. And on the other hand, what I keep hearing in the Israeli ecosystem is that the EU AI Act is GDPR on steroids. And I'm between those two sayings in that tension. And so I'd love it if we can visit this topic of both standardization and what's unique about the EU AI Act from your standpoint.
Yeah, no, it's a really fascinating topic, and you made a really good introduction in this kind of discussion, because it's not only happening in Israel, also in Germany right now, especially when you are talking to industry players. They're all saying, "Oh God, the next GDPR 2.0 is coming." And again, I said already, yes, certain points are definitely similar bad. So for example, the enforcement and governance system or mechanism that was being built up, people are sometimes saying, yeah, it will not happen what happened with the GDPR because this is NLF. But the big problem is that the European Union in the end was not strong enough to say or to dictate member states a little bit how they are building up their governance system. So you could even argue that it will be even more of a chaos than GDPR, because in GDPR it was at least only the data protection authorities, and now it can be everyone basically. It depends really on the national government who they are designating as national competent authority. It can be the cybersecurity authority, market surveillance, market or competition authority, data protection authority, and so on and so on. But in other parts, or maybe to continue and to close with the negative part of my answer, on vague definitions, currently missing guidelines, and so on, of course, there is again the same risk that certain key terms or key definitions similar to the GDPR, and I think the AI Act probably has even more of those unclear key definitions and key principles. If those are not getting further defined, then indeed we could see something similar to the GDPR, that companies for many, many years do not really know how to deal with it. The point is, and now I'm going to the positive side, that Sebastian, but also people in the commission, people in the parliament, of course, saw what happened in Germany and other member states, and now tried at least here and there to mitigate it at least. Let me start with guidelines. The Commission hates me for it, but I'm very proud. I put in an Article 82A, which is an obligation for the Commission to provide guidelines on, I think, 7 or 8 key topics. For example, what is substantial modification? Another example, what is AI? We have now a very broad AI definition from the OECD, and even with the recital 6, it's not really clear if, let's say, a system which is a bit symbolic AI system, but more maybe a classical software system, if this would qualify as AI. Those things in the future, the Commission needs to clarify in guidelines. And due to this article, even though there is not an obligation to do it in 1 year or in 2 years, but very likely the Commission will do so rather soon, because the Commission is always following the law. And yeah, this probably will have a very, very big effect, and I think will avoid one of the biggest mistakes that we had with the GDPR. And Sebastian is always underlining it. And after he told me for the first time, I'm also in every, or on every panel, in every podcast, in every interview saying the same. The big difference to GDPR is really, and you mentioned it, Article 40, the presumption of conformity, if you are building your AI system on top of a technical harmonized standard. This is what everyone with data protection was looking for, a kind of blueprint how to process personal data in a GDPR compliant way. If now Sensenelec and Sebastian Halmsleben are managing to create horizontal AI standards that are, of course, rather general, but still specific enough for developers of AI systems to do good and the right design choices, processing of data choices, and so on, then I think that at least on this part, we will probably prevent a GDPR 2.0 on the enforcement and governance part. As I said, I think, unfortunately, we are repeating certain mistakes, but at least if the compliance is easier and cheaper due to the standards, this would, of course, be already a huge advantage. And as you said, could already also be a blueprint for future digital law. If it's working good with the AI Act, maybe in the future almost all digital legislation will use it because we both spoke about it. It enables you and the co-legislator, so I mean you industry and the co-legislator, to make swift adjustments if there's a new development with the technology.
Amazing. Adding to what you just said, I think Article 40 is an actual innovation in my mind from a standardization implementation perspective when I meet businesses and I'm talking to government, because that clarity was really needed. People don't want to find themselves confused again like they were when GDPR was pushed out into the market. And I think that, done right, standards could really be the vehicle to promote that clarity. I have the same challenge of vagueness sometimes, having to push things out through full consensus, which is challenging. But I think it's better than nothing. And it's always an iterative approach that can take us forward. The standardization documents, deliverables are not, etched in stone. They're living, breathing documents that can be and are updated on a half-yearly, yearly basis, depending on the standard. So I think it's really a good vehicle to promote the legislation. And I'll just explain something to the viewers who are not that maybe experienced with how standardization works. Usually it's a bottom-up approach, meaning industry players through their countries would come into the table and try to promote standards under consensus. And if that's a good standard that they push out, then the market itself adopts it. But it's not usually that the legislator, any certain legislator comes in and says, I want you to develop X or Y for me. It's usually a standard is formed. And if it is, again, good enough, you'll see certain countries, certain legislators coming in and pointing out, please uphold to this and this standard. What's different with the EU AI Act emanating from Article 40 that you mentioned, which I find really innovative, is what Sebastian that we mentioned calls the top-down approach, in which the legislator comes in and says, this is the legislative document, but here are the standards to uphold it. And here's the connection between them. And we as legislator, we as the commission take full responsibility that if you implement the standards as we designated them, then you'll be under the presumption of conformity, which again is sounds maybe technical, but it's groundbreaking from my perspective.
Yeah.
And that's because of one of the anecdotes that I mentioned before. Back in 2018, I was consulting to enterprise clients through Microsoft, and I was in a very small committee for standardization, which I didn't actually plan on being in, but came in because of a friend and a shared project. And then I found out that SC42, the AI International Standardization Committee, is being formed. And so I flew to China to the inauguration event, and I was super excited, and I saw into the future why it's going to be so important. And then I came back to Israel, wanting to tell everybody about it. Called up a friend of mine who was leading the research center for Meta. Back then they were called Facebook, and told him, listen, I've got to tell your engineers about this. They need to know. So he gathered the room and a lot of engineers sitting there listening. And I finish, everybody claps, and then no questions, which is a sign for, something went wrong. So I tried getting into the audience, asking literally, what did they think and how do they see it implemented in their work? And nobody wanted to comment. And just one brave, I'll say, very experienced elder engineer raised his hand and said, listen, Yoav, this is really very interesting. And it sounds like you're doing very important work, and kudos to you. But, for us, until it comes from the audit division, from headquarters, we're not going to really care about it, which is, again, back in 2018, which is interesting from two perspectives. One is that when we were developing back then our national efforts for Israel, it was really eminent that, and that incident highlighted it for me, and I brought it to the Prime Minister committees for AI, that we should re-educate or re-examine how we educate our engineers to care about safety and ethic topics and trustworthiness, even if it doesn't come from headquarters, right? So that's actually a topic in discussion ever since. And the other point is that today we're at 2024, EU AI Act finalized. Now people do care about standards, and they're going to care about AI standards even more because of things like Article 40. So I'm sorry I took a little bit too much time on it, but I wanted to really try and clarify to a lot of the people who are not into the difference between standards and regulation, why is it so important? Why is it so unique, and how it makes a difference? Because usually people think about, standards for, I don't know, pacifiers for babies or standards for cars. and they view legislation as a different topic. And here there's actually a collaboration. And what's nice in different countries that I visit and talk to and work with is that I can see how we're in countries that they have joint teams, meaning standardization AI experts together with academia, together with lawmakers and legislators, how the products and deliverables are much better in implementation. So that's why I'm a little bit excited about the topic. And that was our first meeting point in our discussion in Geneva.
And
So
maybe just to comment on that, just very,
sure.
very shortly, because in Europe, and I guess it's the same in Israel, technical standards and standardization bodies have not always good reputation, because especially many NGOs are saying that civil society it's not represented at least adequately, and so on and so on. I do see the point sometimes that it's of course easier for a company like Siemens to send one person to a standardization body in Germany, or to send Senelec even, and so on, than for a small NGO. But honestly, as you know, I'm now traveling quite a lot and I'm meeting a lot of people. And actually, I met also many, many NGOs that are now even like Safer AI. I think one of them is even heading a sub-working group of GTC 21, and also a lot of other academics and interest groups with a civil society background are already active, are already participating. From others, I hear that they want to participate and they will do so soon. And maybe on top, of course, we can still improve it. And one really nice best practice that I saw is coming from the UK, where the Turing Institute built up this AI standardization hub, where they are basically having a kind of working group that is, bringing together people who are not able to go to a standardization group, and then this group is sending two representatives to BSI, so to the UK standardization body. And this I find an extremely good best practice that also Germany, for example, should do, that we have in Berlin a kind of mirror group that is then sending 1-2 people to the DIN, National Standardization Body of Germany. And with that, I would say then it's maybe even better to do a lot via standards, because they involve much better actors from different parts of the society than the normal legislative process. So this whole talk about it's anti-democratic and so on, I do not really see. What I saw so far from standardization is it's a very lengthy and, I would say, democratic, inclusive process that of course can be even more improved, but I would say we are on a very good road there.
I completely agree and I empathize. So for the listeners that don't know some of the abbreviations, I'll visit some of the points that you've mentioned. And reflection point, I really love that you brought that specific example to the table, because BSI is the British Standards Institute. And I really love what they did with the collaboration innovation perspective. They took the Alan Turing Research Center and had that collaborate with government and with BSI all together. And one of the results is the group that you've mentioned. And I keep talking in the last 5 months about how much I would like Israel to have that kind of collaboration happening. And hopefully it will in the future. Actually, I think even just yesterday, somebody replied to a post of mine from JTC 21, which I'll explain again in a second what it exactly is. And she's from the UK embassy in Israel, talking about them having the AI Standards Hub. And I told her, yeah, I know all about the AI Standards Hub. I've been talking about it for the last 5 months, even in IFAN when I gave the keynote in London. So I think it's an amazing example. If some of you don't know, just Google AI Standards Hub in the UK. You can read more about it, and I'll maybe add a link to it. JTC 21 should be explained. That is the standardization committee from Senelec, which is basically the standardization body under the EU. And they are the one developing the standards relative to Article 40 that we've mentioned to support the entire act from a standardization implementation perspective, trying to take the legislation from, let's say, 200,000 feet to 10,000 feet above the ground. Obviously, there still needs to be work done from standardization to actual implementation and research and production. And for that, you have certification and you have different processes to take that forward. But again, it's bridging a very wide gap that has not been bridged before, which is amazing. And I actually just came back last Friday from the 9th meeting plenary of JTC 21. That was my first visit to the committee, and I intend to continue visited. Although Israel is only an observer state, I feel like we really have a lot to contribute since we were very involved in the international layer of ISO IC SC42. That's the distinction between the international layer to the regional one. So JTC 21 would be the regional one, just like we in Israel have SII, or you have DIN, or Sebastian has VDE. So I wanted to clarify a little bit about that. And I think that takes it maybe unintended to the entire historical standardization process, which was maybe challenged in the EUA Act, if you want to visit a little bit. And if not, we can talk about maybe, you choose, we can talk about the internal application of the EU and its finalized approach, meaning there's going to be an AI office, I think, established on the 21st of February. So you can decide where we want to take the conversation.
Yeah, maybe I can give a little bit of an overview also about the next steps and how I already said, I think the governance system is rather complicated, but of course, it's not only enforcement, but it's also an interplay with standardization bodies and so on. Maybe I can a little bit continue on that. So as you just mentioned, there is now an AI office. There will be also an AI board. Simply said, as the AI office has a focus on foundation models, on general purpose AI models, how the name is now. And they should monitor that basically the technical documentation in 52C is being followed, but also that those systemic GPI models are playing by the rules that the new Article 52D is setting. The AI office has then also a few other points to do. Together with member states, it needs to encourage codes of conduct, as the AI office needs to do a code of practice for GPI models again. And the commission is also playing an important role, which is a bit tricky now because there is basically the commission and there's the office, and the office is part of the commission. But nevertheless, you need to separate a little bit, because when the AI Act talks about the commission, it's a very likely key on gross units A1 in DG Connect, which is this one department of the commission focusing mostly on digital stuff. And Kian Gross with his unit A.1 was basically the person in charge of writing the AI report and so on. And he will now not create the office, but with his unit, he will make sure, for example, that the guidelines that I was speaking about in Article 82, written in time, that when it's about enforcement, there is in Article 66 the so-called union safeguard mechanism, which is a means to coordinate different national enforcement bodies to also build up best practices and so on and so on. This will all happen in this unit A2. This unit A2 is also heavily engaging with standardization bodies, especially Senelec. They were making the standardization requests that was being sent, I think, early last year, but they will also now do an updated standardization request that is further specifying what needs to be done based on the final AI Act, and especially what needs to be done in GPI models and standards for those GPI models. They also need to create, already kind of new lists or potential new lists for upcoming delegated acts. So they basically need to monitor the whole development in the field of AI in order to, if there is necessity, jump in and, as you and I discussed, change the law a little bit. They could, of course, all the time issue new standardization requests also. So to summarize, maybe it's now a situation where especially the Commission have a lot of different tasks. As I said, it's also a bit tricky to always separate those different bodies, but
Yeah.
mainly between AI Board, AI Office, and European Commission, you will see in the next months a lot of different steps, different deliverables. For example, the code of practice for general purpose AI systems or the guidelines. And all of that together with the harmonized standards from Senelec is hopefully building in the next 1 to 3 years. These are the different transition periods of the AI Act, a working ecosystem where every element is fitting to each other. And if this process is being done well, then maybe all my doubts that I was raising at the very beginning are not realizing, not manifesting. And this is what I'm at the moment always saying. We still have a chance, but it's a very hard work now in front of us and very big task, let's say.
Mhm. And that intricacy also has the relations to the Digital Service Act package and the GDPR. So that
Exactly.
all has to work together in order to be implemented the right way. So it's not
Exactly.
different legislations, they're all interconnected.
Exactly. I was now basically just focusing on
Sure.
the implementation of the AI Act, but you
Yeah.
are 100% correct. And this was one of my points of criticism at the beginning. Of course, the AI Act as a horizontal law is overlapping, contradicting, but sometimes also just complementing existing legislation. And this is another big task from the Commission. And I'm very curious to monitor them myself if they are managing to put all the different units that are working on different pieces of legislation, you
Yeah.
named it, DSA, DMA, Cyber Resilience Act, GDPR, and so on, if they are managing to put them all together and force them a little bit to cooperate and work with
Yeah.
each other.
Yeah.
Because, for data protection people, it's not usual to think about cybersecurity, but in
Yeah.
the future, Cyber Resilience Act, GDPR do have some overlaps. AI
Of course.
has overlaps with GDPR. So it's not anymore possible that you are just concentrate on your one topic.
For
Everything is
sure.
interconnected.
For sure. So, it's just that because the previous statement you made have finished on a very positive note on, being hopeful that everything will work. So I wanted to bring you back to skepticism. That's why I made that
Yes.
addition. But jokes aside, I think what you just articulated is spot on because what I see on the field is that a lot of the startups now that are building interesting products are in that space of cybersecurity for AI, specifically for Gen AI, talking about rule-based approach on how to implement the implementation and access to that resources of Gen AI in an organization. So that's a real challenge. And so that's why it's also important the collaboration from a legislative perspective. And I think that point of intricacies from an internal, let's say, regional level, takes us to another interesting conversation about the international layer, which I've mentioned before through standardization being implemented through SC42, which is again the International AI Standardization Committee from ISO and IEC. But obviously, there's the interplay between the geopolitical interplay, we can call it like that, between what the US is trying to do with the AI White House office. Just this morning, we discussed the FCC's ban on conversational Gen AI bots. There's the UK G20 that happened. There's the China Belt and Road Initiative that are trying to harness into their own AI framework for safety. So a lot going on there from the higher abstraction level, which I'd be happy to hear your thoughts and your perspective on.
Yes, this point I also make on a lot of panels that I'm actually also rather positive and optimist on that part. So I have also both sides on a lot of topics because, well, if you really check into detail the different regulatory proposals, or let's call it AI policy proposals across the world, you and I know that all of them are based on the same principles. Even the Chinese automated decision-making legislation has things like transparency, human oversight, non-discrimination, and so on and so on. which in the end, even though we have now very different AI policies, will help us again to streamline. And we saw this now in G7 and G20, but also in ISO, standardization, and so on, that it's indeed helpful that those key principles are basically the same, because then also things like risk management is going in a similar direction. If you now look the NIST, US NIST agency risk assessment, the risk assessments that the AI Act has, the risk assessments that the OECD is working on, well, a bit different here and there, but again, it's rather going in the same direction. And this, I think, on detail will help us to streamline in the next years even more. I think policy choices like from the European Union to use the OECD definition for AI will also help a lot, because the United States in the NIST agency again is using the same definition. And maybe if we are going away from the details, even in a world where currently we have a lot of conflicts, especially between Russia, between China, the US, partially also Europe, especially with the first country, Russia, there is at least some willingness to cooperate. And one episode that made me really happy was at the end of last year, I think it was in November, this public announcement from China and United States to work together against lethal automatic weapon systems, or at least for some international frameworks there. And I think those things are indicating that, well, things can still go wrong, but at least there is willingness. And again, the big benefit is, or advantage is, that we have the same baseline. We are all have the same understanding. And compared to other topics, I do think, therefore, that on AI, international cooperation is still a realistic outlook, and that we probably there at least will see some common understanding and, yeah, joining forces between at least a high number of states, which again, especially in current times, I think is a rather positive thing. And I guess we all hope for similar things in, for example, climate change or different
Definitely.
topics. Yeah.
Definitely. Well, from my perspective, I couldn't agree more with what you said, because it's really part of the effort that I'm trying to do and promote behind the scenes. So I'm taking active roles in some of the platforms that you've mentioned. I'm in the OECD AI working group on risk. Also now entered the one on AI index, which is the newest one, trying to create the index to do that, let's say, leveling the playing field, so that we can look at all the countries from the same binoculars, if that makes any sense. And I've also obviously been part of SC42 ever since 2018, ever since the inauguration. And part of the reason that I joined JDC 21 that we've mentioned before is that interplay between international to regional, and trying to make sure that we're having a cohesive conversation, not only with the EU, but also through international standards, also back to the US with NIST, which is again the standardization body for the US. So they're the ones behind the RMF 1.0, now 2.0, with the added distinctions for generative AI, an effort that Elham Tabassi and her team are leading, which is an amazing operation that they're doing there. Also the ISA consortium they're promoting. I'm also in the Canadian standardization committees for SEC, because I see how the conversation and collaboration is important. So I try through my work be a sort of bridge between all those different platforms. And obviously there are a lot of other professionals doing that, but that's one of the reasons that I really like your perspective on the geopolitical interplay here. And again, why it's so important to create that safe, trustworthy AI that we all want to see implemented. So with the fire example, we all want to use the fire, but we want to use it in a safe way. Same
Indeed.
goes to AI.
Indeed. And I think, especially now, also speaking as a European, there was shortly before COVID, at least, this narrative, especially in Brussels, that, yeah, a little bit make Europe great again. Just focus on ourselves. We can do best. We don't need the rest of the world. I'm, as an international thinking man, human being, and as someone who is really believing in our transatlantic partnership, in our partnership with Israel, with the UK, and so on and so on, I'm very, very happy to see the shift. Here, I would say now in Brussels, a large majority is again very, very favorable for international cooperation. And yeah, again, 5 years ago, it looked quite differently. So I think there a lot of good people were generating a lot of pressure to change the tide back. And nowadays, at least in this part, it's looking really much more positive. And also here in the European Union, there is not talk anymore about, yeah, we are now doing the best AI. We don't need to cooperate with any other country because we know everything best. No. Now, the understanding is exactly like you're saying, if we are all working together, we can learn from each other, and also our technology is getting better by using different codes from different countries, different GPUs from different countries, and so on. So it's really much more, again, talking about international trade and international cooperation. And this makes me personally very happy.
So that makes both of us happy. I think that touches a bit on recent news for Israel. If I can bring in a concrete example to the feelings, emotions, and beliefs that we both are operating around. Israel just got a reaffirmation of its adequacy. That's a specific term for being audited by the EU to uphold certain levels and standards for data protection and human rights relative to data implementation from a legislator perspective, not just by businesses, but how the legislature views it. And I'm so happy that Israel got that reaffirmation, because again, that's people coming back to what you said of people maybe in the EU saying, oh, we don't need anybody, we can do everything ourselves. So Israelis can say, oh, we can do the innovation ourselves. That's not true. I think everybody in the local ecosystem understand how much Israel is dependent on international collaboration, and how a small thing, right, like adequacy, can add to the trade and alleviate the efforts that startups and micro SMEs have to go through in order to collaborate and have products deployed in the EU and vice versa. So that is amazing. And basically what's behind my motivation today is trying to promote something like adequacy relative to the EU AI Act, meaning I want to see how we in Israel are part of the work in JTC 21. Obviously, we're not part of the legislation, but we can try and help with standardization that are in line with the EU AI Act, so that we can continue that adequacy train of thought from data protection into AI implementation, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
No,
okay, so we're both
definitely.
happy about the collaboration. Yeah.
Yes. No, and I think our talk underlines again how important it is to really continue this great work that has been done already over the last years at the OECD and other platforms.
Amazing. Kai, so again, thank you so much for making the time. I know how hectic your schedule is, let alone your flight schedule. So I really personally appreciate it. And I think it's going to be very insightful for our local ecosystem for sure, if not internationally. So until our next conversation, thank you.
Thank you.